Welcome to today's lesson on division with quotients with zeros. Today I'm going to teach you what to do when you're trying to divide and your quotient has a zero in it. Let's go ahead and get started. We are going to begin today by reviewing some basic vocabulary. When you're dividing, the number that you're dividing is called the dividend. The number that you're dividing it by is called the divisor, and the answer to the division problem is called the quotient. We are going to begin today dividing 3,612 by a divisor of 4. So let's go ahead and start by finding out how many times we can fit our divisor 4 into our first digit of our dividend. Now 4 is larger than 3, so that means that we cannot successfully put one group of 4 into 3. So we need to put a 0 as a placeholder in this place value. So that's our first 0 in our quotient that we're going to be working with today. Since 4 cannot fit into 3, we need to now move over to our next place value. How many times can 4 fit into 36? Well, 4 times 9 equals 36. So we're going to write 36 below, and then we're going to subtract down, and that gives us 0. Now we're ready to go ahead and move down our next place value. So I'm going to move down my 1. But again, 4 is greater than 1. That means that 4 cannot fit into 1, so I have to again put a 0 as a placeholder. Now this is very, very important, because if I don't put this 0 here, we're going to be missing our tens place altogether. So now that I've put a 0 as a placeholder, I can move down our 2 so that we can find out how many times 4 can go into 12. 4 can go into 12 3 times, and 4 times 3 equals 12. And when I subtract down, that gives me a remainder of 0. And I don't have any further place values to bring down. Now I want you to notice how important it is that we put these zeros in the quotient. Our first 0 was a placeholder to make sure that our 9 wasn't put into the thousands place and was lined up with our hundreds place. Our second 0 was a placeholder for the tens place, and that made sure that our 3 didn't accidentally become 30 in the tens place. So now let's go ahead and check our work. To check our work, we need to multiply our quotient by our divisor, and we should end up with our dividend. So let's multiply 903 times 4. 3 times 4 equals 12. 4 times 0 equals 0, plus 1 equals 1. And 4 times 9 equals 36. And as you can see, our dividend is the same as the product when we multiply together our quotient and our divisor. So that means that we completed the problem correctly. Let's practice a problem together. We're going to divide 8,871 by 8. 8 can go into 8 one time. 8 times 1 equals 8, and when we subtract down, we get 0. So now we have to bring down our next placeholder. Now notice that we put a 1 in our first place value, even though we didn't in our first one. That's because the first digit in our dividend was equal or greater to our divisor. If our first digit's ever less than our divisor, we need to make sure we put a 0 as a placeholder and move on to our next place value. So now I'm bringing down my 8, and 8 can go into 8 one time. 8 times 1 equals 8, and I'm going to subtract down again, and that gives me 0. So now I'm ready to bring down my next place value. Now here we go. 7 is less than 8. So that means I need to put a 0 as a placeholder and bring down my next digit. So now I need to find out how many times 8 can go into 71. I know that 8 times 8 is 64, and if I go to 8 times 9, I'll be above 71. So 8 times 8 equals 64. And when we subtract down, I have to carry over my 1. 11 minus 4 equals 7. I don't have any further place values to bring down, So that means I have a remainder of 7. But let's go ahead and check our work because we want to make sure that we did this correctly, especially since we have a 0 in our quotient. So we need to multiply 1,108 times our divisor, which was 8. Now after we multiply these two numbers, we're then going to add on our remainder, and that will give us our dividend. So 8 times 8 equals 64. 8 times 0 equals 0, plus 6 equals 6. 8 times 1 equals 8. 8 times 1 equals 8. And now we have to add on our remainder, which is 7. 7 plus 4 equals 11. 6 plus 1 equals 7. And then we bring down our remaining place values, which are 8s. So we have 8,871, which is also our dividend. So that means that we completed this problem correctly. Let's walk through a word problem together. The class ant farm is being divided between 7 students to take home for the summer. There are 6,530 ants in the ant farm. How many ants will the 7 students be taking home? Well, let's start by setting up our problem. We know that we're going to be dividing 6,530. So I'm going to write that in the middle of our screen. 6,530. And we're going to be dividing this by the 7 students that are taking them home. So I'm going to put a divisor of 7. So our first step is to see how many times 7 can go into our first digit, which is 6. But since 6 is less than our divisor of 7, we need to put a 0 as a placeholder and move into our next place value. 7 can go into 65 9 times. 7 times 9 equals 63, and when we subtract down, that gives us 2. So now we're ready to move down our next place value. 7 can go into 23 3 times. 7 times 3 equals 21. And when I subtract down, that gives me 2 left over. So now I'm ready to bring my last place value. 7 can go into 20 2 times. 7 times 2 equals 14. And when I subtract, that gives me a remainder of 6. So that means that each student will be able to take home 932 ants, and that will mean that there are 6 ants left over. But let's go ahead and let's check our work. Let's try multiplying back our quotient by our divisor, and then we'll have to add on that remainder to get our dividend. So we're going to multiply 932 times 7. 7 times 2 equals 14. 7 times 3 equals 21, plus 1 is 22. And 9 times 7 equals 63, plus 2, which is 65. So now all we have to do is add on a remainder of 6. And when we add on a remainder of 6, we get 6,530, which justifies that we did the problem correctly. So that means that each student will be bringing home 932 ants, and that's going to leave 6 ants left over. Let's review what you learned in today's lesson. The number that you're dividing is called the dividend, and the number you're dividing it by is called the divisor. The quotient is going to be the answer to your division problem. So we're going to start by dividing 2 into 2. 2 can go into 2 one time. 2 times 1 equals 2. When I subtract down, I get 0, and I have to bring down my next place value. Since 2 can't go into 0, I need to move to my next place value to bring down. But before I can do that, I need to make sure I put a 0 as a placeholder. So I'm going to bring down my 2, and 2 can go into 2 one time. 2 times 1 equals 2. And then I'm going to subtract down and bring down my next place value. Once again, 2 cannot go into 0, so I need to put 0 as my placeholder. And 2 times 0 equals 0. So now when I subtract down, my remainder will be 0. To check your work, you can always multiply your quotient back by your divisor, and that will give you your dividend.